Hi everyone, welcome back to part 2 of our Intro to Blender series using the Portal Jump project that we were analyzing in the previous video. To briefly recap, we took a look at Blender's capabilities by demonstrating how it could be integrated into a simple animation pipeline as a free 3D software. We were able to see how meshes, objects, lights, add-ons, and animations are created, which prepared us for this phase of our analysis. Blender is an amazing creative tool that allows you to get up close and personal with your virtual worlds. And in today's video, we'll be looking at how materials behave when interacting with lights in your scenes and how modifiers can optimize your workflow. I'll also touch on some things that you should watch out for as your scenes become more advanced. Let's begin. There are many different types of materials and shaders that you can find inside of Blender using the free Blender Kit add-on. These materials all have various properties that can be manually adjusted inside of the material editor found to the right, or using the shader editor found in the workspace drop-down menu. Each material will respond to light differently, not only because of the emission settings of your light sources, but because it is influenced directly by the limitations or capabilities of the renderer. Depending on the render engine that you use for your projects, the materials in your scenes will respond differently to your lighting setup purely because the respective render engines can only calculate and process the geometric and material data up to a particular point. The EEVEE Render Engine, as well as the Cycles Render Engine, allows for real-time viewport display. EEVEE, however, gives you a much faster real-time playback for your animations and edits over Cycles. Cycles does in fact support real-time playback, but depending on your sample count, the scene may require additional processing resources, which may ultimately result in a low playback frame rate. Because the EEVEE Render Engine processes stylized, cel-shaded, toon-shaded, or non-photorealistic materials much faster than Cycles, editing the light and material options becomes more streamlined. The settings for the EEVEE Render Engine can be found in the Properties panel to the right, where you can also turn on features like Bloom. This boosts a lot of the lights in your scenes, giving them a surreal stylized glow. Adjusting the settings for the viewport and render samples, light passes, light bounces, and subsurface properties allows for the lights in your scenes to affect the way that your materials and shaders might appear. The higher the value used in each setting will increase the overall quality, but this will decrease the frame rate at which Blender is able to play back the new data. Simply put, your software will need more memory and processing power to compensate for the demands being made on the CPU, RAM, video card, and graphics card. All of the light settings like the color, the power or the wattage, radius, and shadow behavior are accessible in the Properties panel to the right. You're even able to influence the way that the lights affect the diffuse, specular, and volume parameters in your scene by adjusting those three settings. The higher the value used, the higher the influence of that particular setting. Adjust these settings according to your various scenes because there isn't a one-size-fits-all kind of setup where lighting and materials are concerned. Using the shader editor, however, is specific to the materials and shaders, as lights are not usually edited inside of the node editor. The shader editor allows you to further adjust the properties of the materials in your scene by adding additional creative input nodes to customize or amplify the various components within a material. For example, when using a roughness or specular map for a model, the editor allows you to add nodes like Color Ramp node, which is essentially just a levels slider. This slider, when pushed either towards the dark or towards the light, influences how much of the roughness or specularity actually registers and shows when the light hits the material. Because EEVEE excels at non-photorealism, it is much easier to work with the stylized nature of the materials, shaders, and even some models found in the Blender Kit add-on. You're able to accomplish a much faster turnover with concepts, scene builds, lighting, and animation testing, with the trade-off being stylization over realism. Using the Cycles Render Engine involves a more meticulous and calculated approach. The properties are more extensive, and depending on your scene, quality definitely comes at the sacrifice of true real-time playback. Settings like render samples, screen resolution, and image compression all play a part in how quickly Blender can work to perform the tasks. Furthermore, selecting the filmic or filmic log setting under color management boosts the realism for you by adjusting your lights and materials to behave closer in line with real-world optics. With a low viewport sample count, you're able to use cycles in a similar fashion to EEVEE as far as editing materials and shaders in real time is concerned. The higher viewport sample count, the longer it will take cycles to update the scene while maintaining realism. You can optimize your render times by using your CPU to render your scenes in cycles and using your GPU when rendering with EEVEE. Modifiers. When you're creating a model from scratch or modifying an already existing one, using the long list of native Blender modifiers will definitely give you the upper hand. From increasing the poly count on a mesh for more detail to automatically replicating a model hundreds of times for a scene, using the modifiers will optimize the way that you create. They're broken up into 4 different categories: modify, generate, deform, and physics. Each category gives you a different kind of modifier with a specific function that you can use to help you to create. Just scroll through the options to see a description of what each modifier does, and depending on the modifier that you use, or how many modifiers you stack, which just means using more than one modifier on a model at a time, it has the potential to slow down your software. Similar to all of the functions mentioned previously, a higher demand on the system hardware will produce the visuals that you need, but at the expense of performance, speed, memory, image size, and file size. There's a connection that you need to be aware of when using Blender or working in 3D production for that matter. As creatives, when given access to tools like Blender, it can encourage several detrimental malpractices around building our scenes, which models we use, why we use them, which materials to use, and how to know when to use what. As an independent filmmaker, animator, or VFX artist, the hardware that you are working with is typically limited when contrasted against the production setups of large studios and well-funded creative teams. The key to making Blender work for you and not against you is to monitor the amount of resources that Blender has to use in order to produce your scenes. Using multiple high-poly models with large materials and textures combined with 4K to 8K or even higher level HDRIs, complex linked animations and simulations, custom large-scale lighting setups, and to top it off, ridiculous render output settings will absolutely kill your creative flow. The more add-ons and tools activated inside of Blender, the more resources the system will need to run just to run the software. When you begin layering extremely high-quality assets, materials, and lights into a scene, Blender will unfortunately encounter a significantly higher crash count than if you were to either use smaller but high-quality materials and models, or by switching to the EEVEE renderer for faster processing. There are some materials, shaders, and models that are created by members of the Blender community for the Blender Kit add-on that come with use-specific instructions. Some of these instructions may indicate that some of the materials may be too large for EEVEE or may not register on your models at all. This is because in these cases, the assets were created for cycles specifically. If this happens when working in EEVEE, simply switch your material by drag and dropping an EEVEE-friendly material. Or you can convert the entire scene style by switching to cycles and having some other options made available that aren't compatible with EEVEE. Your render times will vary from project to project and system to system when you consider all of the various ways that you can output your animations and scenes from Blender. Optimization will always be king when working with Blender or any 3D software because your time is precious and ideas don't stop. To keep up, learn to optimize your workspace, render settings, passes, and output formats, which would enable you to create a solid workflow and a pretty robust production pipeline. This was part 2 of our Portal Jump Intro to Blender world building segment. It's only number 2 out of 24 tutorials for our 24 for 24 tutorial package promotion, where I walk you through the various production processes and techniques that I use for animation and VFX. If you are an indie filmmaker, animator, or VFX artist, these 24 free tutorials are perfect for you, and I can't wait to share the others with you. Feel free to share your thoughts down below on your own techniques when using materials, lighting your scenes, or even rendering your projects inside of Blender. Thanks for watching this video all the way to the end, and if you did, consider hitting the subscribe button, because coming up next we'll be looking at motion tracking and compositing using Adobe After Effects. We'll be building an apocalyptic cityscape, and this one's going to be packed. So this is Kyle Stephen with your Intro to Blender segment, reminding you to stay focused, to stay consistent, and remember to follow the compass. Thanks guys.